As a result of climate change, pastoralists and their animals suffer from recurrent and prolonged droughts. Their resilience depends on their right to access land.
Sisi kulingana vile maumbile wa Samburu iko, sisi ni watu wa ng'ombe na mbuzi. Wafugaji, hiyo mabadiliko ya hali ya hewa sisi ndio ameonea zaidi. Kwa sababu unaangalia mvua ikinyesha kidogo, unapata nyasi inamea kidogo na nakunjana kishwa, inarudi tena kukauka hapo hapo.
Tumeathirika sana kwa sababu ukiangalia hapo awali kulikuwa na mvua wakati kwa wakati. Lakini nyakati hizi hata ile climate imechange. Na mvua ikikuja tutapata mvua kidogo compared na miaka kadhaa ilikuwa hapo awali. Na pia nyasi ilikuwa inapatikana kwa wingi. Na kwa wakati huu inabidi mali zetu waende mbali wakitafuta malisho. So tumeathirika kama wamama kwa sababu tunakuta ya kwamba hata katika ile kujifungua na kuwa na watoto wadogo tunakosa kupata chakula nzuri kwa miili yetu ama health.
There is a growing awareness that land is a crucial asset in climate change adaptation. The Land Rights and Resilience in Kenya project investigates the relationship between land rights and climate change adaptation, looking into shifting land needs, land claims, and land rights with a focus on the pastoral communities.
Our work package area is on land law reforms and pastoralist access to land. We focus on the processes of land and law reforms and how that affects pastoralist access to land.
The main objective of my research is to understand the interrelationship between community-based conservation imperatives in northern Kenya and pastoralist climate change adaptation.
My project focuses on climate change adaptation and pastoralists among the Maasais of Kajiado County.
Our million-dollar question was how are the international and national institutions, how do they support pastoralist adaptation needs? So that is my research topic for the PhD.
The project further examines how adaptation strategies interact with land needs, conflict, and new law reforms.
The research project, although we began a couple of years ago, is important and remains relevant today because it's about land and access to land rights. And one thing we should underline is that the land question in any agrarian society is equivalent to the socioeconomic and political organization of that society. In fact, if you want to see whether a society is democratic and whether the society is having challenges of development, you look at how they are resolving their land question.
So us, especially from Institute for Development Studies, University of Nairobi, we come from a development perspective. And in a development perspective, we are really trying to see how we can also, through knowledge generation, support the efforts of the government. Now that the policies are in place, what's the practice? What is the integrated development plans of the counties saying about this? How about the NGOs that are working on the ground? What plans, how are they supporting the pastoralists to cope and adapt to climate change issues?
The most important thing about this research is that evidence around the hidden processes that create double vulnerabilities to the local communities and basically denying them the chance, to be able to adapt much more effectively to the impacts of climate change.
Increased fragmented rangelands, restricted mobility, and climate change is making life hard for livestock herders in drylands.
Hapo mbeleni kidogo mambo ilikuwa mzuri kwa sababu tulikuwa tunahama na kwa mama ilikuwa ni free. Lakini mabadiliko ikakuja kuingia. Samburu tulikata mashamba. Baada ya kukata mashamba kila mtu yuko na title yake. Ukijaribu kuhama kidogo uende hata kama ni malisho ulikuwa unapeleka ng'ombe yako ama mbuzi unaambiwa ni shamba yangu. Kwa hivyo ile ng'ombe mingi ile tulikuwa nayo amekuwa ni ngumu sana kulisha hiyo ng'ombe kwa sababu ile land tuko naye amekuwa ni personal land, sio group land.
Kama wamama kwa wakati huu tunajiendelesha katika ile hali ya maendeleo. Lakini sana sana ukiangalia kama hii jamii tumeweza kuwa tunashirikiana na mambo ya kufuga wanyama pori na pia wanyama wa nyumbani, na katika ile hali tunafanya hii kama conservation. So hiyo ndio kipaumbele kubwa ambaye katika community ninatoka imetusaidia kama wamama kwa kutengeneza mambo na miradi ya maji ambaye labda kama kuna mahali hakuna maji, pia basari tunalipia watoto wetu shule, na pia health. Na pia katika hiyo mradi bado kuna ile hali ya kuuza mifugo, na bado hapo mama pia katika jamii hata kuwa amebaki nyuma, labda anaweza kuwa na ng'ombe yake mbuzi ambaye anauza na ataweza pata living yake hapo.
Whenever we speak to communities about community land and the need to safeguard it, they would rather go for subdividing and keeping their plot because they are not sure, given the trends elsewhere, whether they will ever own a piece of land. So there is more incentive for them to safeguard their land and have it titled than to believe that they can be in a community and still have their rights safeguarded. I think that the historical nature of how land has been handled in this country, both colonial and post-colonial, will affect even how we implement new laws that are meant to safeguard pastoralists.
Diversification is one way to adapt to climate change and reduce climatic exposure.
Wafugaji wameelimika. Wameanza kufuga mifugo kama ngamia.
Nataka kuelekea kwa nyasi. Step tunataka kwenda sasa kwa sababu tuko na mashamba kubwa kila boma upande ya 5 ama 10. Kwa sababu mimi mwenyewe nilikuwa nimepanda nyasi. Ukipata kama mvua 2-3 hiyo nyasi inamea na utarudi tena kufuna, ama sio hivyo ufungulie ng'ombe yako kwa kwa shamba. Lakini kitu kubwa ni kuelekea sasa kwa nyasi ya kupanda. Alafu tukisave.
What stood out for me, one is pastoralists on their own, they are agents of change. They understand the environment that which they live. And what we might think that is the solution, they're already kind of implementing the solution. Though at times their solution could be limited because we see livestock die. And then the other thing that stood out is they already understand climate change and they understand what needs to be done.
Due to the change in land laws in Kenya, pastoralists face unprecedented circumstances as large-scale investments lead to the reconfiguration of the economic landscape. This creates winners and losers in a region that already battles with inequality.
We find that community-based conservation presents both opportunities and constraints for pastoralist climate change adaptation. For instance, our data shows that pastoralists feel that by promoting education for children, community-based conservation is enhancing their current and future capabilities to adapt to climate change. In addition, by accessing money from tourism, for instance, some pastoralists felt that community-based conservation is enhancing them to deal with drought. On the other hand, we found that community-based conservation is mainly occurring in areas where pastoralists tend to graze their livestock during the drought season. therefore in a way constraining their access to pasture and grass. And this explains part of the conflicts that we see between pastoralists and promoters of community-based conservation.
Interestingly, the way the land rights have changed, with pastoralists being at the center of this change, through platforms that have been designed for them to participate in terms of making the decision. So the kind of process through which pastoralists lose their rights to land is very interesting, very implicit and hidden. And of course, it is something that we say it is from decision makers in their own resource to participants or public participants in these particular resources.
One of the things that I wish them to know is that when we can't talk of pastoralism without land. So whenever we talk of pastoralism, we have to integrate other issues like land tenure, which plays a key role in terms of access to resources. So if we can find a way of merging the two, we talk of pastoralism, at the same time, access to land and resources through the land tenure, that is a perfect way to deal with it. Because we cannot talk of pastoralism without how they access resources, especially during climate change disasters like droughts.
The pastoralist way of life offers a real route to climate change adaptation and resilience for communities that practice it.
Can everybody embrace and support pastoralism as a mode of production, but not to come and change their way of life? So the mentality or how we think about pastoralism must change for us to support pastoralism. And that is how climate change adaptation will work.
Pastoral communities are the world's most vulnerable to climate shocks and stresses. Governments, development agencies, and other stakeholders need to work with the local people to support their stewardship of the dry lands and the rangelands that they call home.
Ningependa hao wakubwa ambao wanakutana kabla watengeneze mikakati labda ile wanaona ya kwamba inafaa mfugaji. Waweze pia kuhusisha hawa pastoralism ili kile inatoka pia kutoka hawa pastoralism inaangaziwa ili isikuwe ni decision making ya wale tu wanataka kusaidia bila yule ambaye anataka kusaidika, kwa sababu hapo ndo nzuri, kwa sababu wamepata from the source ya kwamba hii ndio nahitaji ili nisaidike.
Based on my research, together with other people in other settings on adaptation, I think it's become very clear that you need to understand how people themselves are adapting and to support that. I would like to see adaptation policies, both in Kenya and more broadly, pay more attention to issues of land tenure, land rights, and access to land.
The whole idea about this project is exactly to highlight the close link between land access and adaptation. And to me personally, also after having done this research, it's really important to highlight that it's not enough to get laws right.
I think the pastoral communities need support, and it's support from, policy support and practice support. We need to have policies that talk to their context in terms of how they can be supported to survive.
There is need to, at the policy level, to really understand or take into account how the changes or the shifting rights to resources, especially for local communities, is actually affecting the ability of adaptation actions that have been planned in the nationally determined contribution and even the national adaptation plans, how these actions are actually not being effective on the ground because of the shifting or the changes in rights to access resources.
What we would like to see is the voice of communities being amplified at different levels, so that actually whatever we do and the kind of interventions that we would like to inform policy debates are interventions that come from the experiences of pastoralists and what the pastoralists themselves desire to have. We must not bring change from above. We must always bring change from below, because the change from below is sustainable, has got a direction, and it will be owned by the pastoralist communities.